You have exactly 30 seconds to explain why you thought it was acceptable to call my hotel soulless before I have my lawyers make your morning significantly worse than it already is. She didn't look up from her mop. She just kept pushing across the floor of the diner, slow and steady, like a woman who had been threatened before and had learned that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. 43 seconds, she said. You miscounted. The man in the suit went very still, and every single person in that diner stopped breathing. Before we go any further, if you've ever worked a job that made you invisible, if you've ever told the truth and paid for it, if you've ever looked at someone with everything and thought, but are they actually happy, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who needs a good story today. And drop a comment telling me the last time you left an honest review and meant every word. Because what happens next, nobody saw coming. Not her, not him, and definitely not you. Her name was May, not Maya, not Marisol, not any of the soft, pretty names that belonged to women whose lives had gone the way they planned. Just May, for letters. Simple. The kind of name a woman gives a daughter when she's too tired to be fancy, but too proud to be careless. May was 34 years old, and she had been tired for most of them. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like someone else's cooking and old carpet. The elevator had been broken for 2 years. The landlord kept saying next month. May had stopped writing it down. She worked double shifts at Patty's Corner Diner on Clement Street in San Francisco, 6 days a week. Sometimes 7 if Patty needed her and May needed the overtime, which was always, because the overtime wasn't extra, it was survival dressed up in a different name. She waited tables from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then she went home, changed her shoes, her feet demanded this small mercy, and came back for the dinner shift from 4 until close, which was supposed to be 10 but was usually 11:30 by the time the last table left, and the floors were mopped and the salt shakers were refilled, and the ketchup bottles were married together, and May had counted her tips on the bus home with the careful attention of a woman who knew that $11 was the difference between a full tank of gas and prayer. She had one daughter, Lily, 8 years old, gap-toothed and loud and absolutely certain that she was the funniest person in any room she walked into, which May secretly believed was true. Lily stayed with May's neighbor, Miss Dorothea, on school nights and with May's mother on weekends when May worked doubles. May's mother lived 40 minutes away by bus and had never once complained about this arrangement, which May knew cost the mother more than she ever said. And this knowledge sat in May's chest like a stone she carried everywhere. Lily had asthma. This is important. Remember this. The medication cost $212 a month with May's insurance, which was a kind of insurance that technically existed, but practically made you feel like you were being punished for getting sick. May had a spreadsheet on her phone. Not a fancy one. Just notes. A column for what was coming in. A column for what was going out. The second column was always longer. She was not a woman who complained. This is also important. Remember this too. She went to work. She came home. She read Lily 3 books before bed, even when her feet were screaming, and her back was auditioning for a medical drama. She packed Lily's lunch with a little note inside. Never anything complicated. Just a star she drew herself, and the words, "You're my favorite human." And she did this every single day without fail, because her own mother had done it for her, and it was the one inheritance she had received that cost nothing and meant everything. She was not on social media much. She had a Facebook she never posted on, and an Instagram where she only looked at pictures of food and dogs, and occasionally cried a little at sunset photos from places she would never go. She did not have a TikTok. She did not have a Twitter, or whatever it was called now. She was not the kind of woman who put her life on the internet, because her life was not the kind of thing she thought anyone wanted to see. But she had a Yelp account. She'd made it 2 years ago to leave a review for a plumber who had fixed her sink for a fair price and been kind about it, which felt like enough of a miracle to document. She had left 3 reviews total in 2 years. The plumber, a taco truck she loved, and now, apparently, the Grand Callaway Hotel. The Grand Callaway Hotel was not the kind of place May went. She had gone exactly once, 3 weeks ago, for her cousin Brenda's birthday dinner in the hotel restaurant. Brenda had married well. Brenda lived in Marin County and had a kitchen island, and used the word curated without embarrassment. May loved Brenda. She also spent the entire birthday dinner quietly calculating how many shifts it would take her to pay for her own entree, which was $42 for a piece of chicken that arrived on the plate like it was ashamed of itself. The service had been cold. Not rude, exactly. Just cold. The waiter had looked through May like she was a window, had addressed every question to Brenda and Brenda's husband and the other guests who arrived in clothes that announced their tax bracket before they sat down, had refilled everyone's water glass except May's, had brought the wrong salad, and when May quietly pointed this out, had looked at her with the specific expression of a man who was tolerating her existence as a professional obligation. The bathroom attendant had been warmer. The coat-check girl had smiled at her. But the restaurant itself, the whole atmosphere of the place, the gleaming marble and the low lighting designed to make certain people feel significant, had made May feel, for 2 hours, like she was a face pressed against glass, watching a party she had not been invited to. She had said nothing at the time. She was good at saying nothing at the time. But that night, after she got home and paid Miss Dorothea and checked on Lily's sleeping and stood in her kitchen eating leftover rice because she hadn't ordered anything at the birthday dinner to save money, she opened Yelp, and she typed. She typed the way people type when they're not performing, when they're not thinking about who might read it, when they're just putting the truth down somewhere, because it has to go somewhere or it'll stay inside you and calcify into something worse. She wrote, "The food is technically fine if you enjoy paying premium prices to feel like an inconvenience. The atmosphere is beautiful if you belong there. If you don't, you'll know within 30 seconds. The staff has a very particular way of making certain guests feel like furniture. Beautiful furniture, but furniture. I've stayed in motels that made me feel more human than this restaurant did. I don't know who this place is for, but I know it's not for people like me. Only rich people with no soul stay here. 1 star. She posted it. She put down her phone. She went to bed. She forgot about it entirely. The Grand Callaway Hotel had 47 reviews on Yelp. 46 of them were 4 or 5 stars. Words like impeccable and transcendent, and the only place I'll stay when I'm in San Francisco. One reviewer had written a 7-paragraph love letter to the thread count of the sheets. Another had described the concierge as though he were a minor deity. May's review was a 47th. It was also, as of 6 days after she posted it, the one that had received the most helpful votes. This was not because the people voting were rebels or activists or even particularly thoughtful. It was because the review was written in plain English by someone who had clearly been there and clearly been uncomfortable and was not trying to be clever about it. It read true. It felt true. And in a world full of reviews that sounded like press releases, true had a way of standing out. The review had also been flagged, not by a regular user, by the hotel, specifically by a member of the hotel's reputation management team, a woman named Sandra who monitored all review platforms daily and had a color-coded spreadsheet for responses and a very clear protocol for 1-star reviews that involved a carefully worded reply and an offer resolution and absolutely no escalation. Sandra had followed the protocol. She had drafted a response. Polite, professional, regretful without admitting fault. She had queued it up for posting. Standard procedure. And then she had made one small mistake. She had included the review in the weekly report. The weekly report went to general manager, and from the general manager to the director of operations, and from the director of operations to the executive assistant, and from the executive assistant. Because this particular week the executive assistant had a new distribution list, she was still learning. To the owner. His name was James Callaway. He was 41 years old. He had built the Grand Callaway from a failing boutique hotel his father had left him when he was 26 and broke, and had no idea what he was doing. And he had turned it into something that people flew across the country to experience. He had done this through a combination of obsessive attention to detail, a genuine and almost inconvenient belief that hospitality was a form of care, and 15 years of working harder than everyone around him expected a man with his name and his inheritance to work. He read every review, not because Sandra didn't handle them well. She did, but because he believed, and this was one of those beliefs that sounded simple and was actually the entire foundation of everything he had built, that the most important information about any business came from the people who had felt something about it, good or bad. The 5-star reviews told him what was working. The 1-star reviews told him what was true. He read May's review at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the kitchen island in his apartment on the 14th floor of a building 4 blocks from a hotel. He read it once. He read it again. He set down his coffee cup. He sat with it for a long moment. The particular stillness of a man who has just been told something he did not know he needed to hear and is deciding what to do about it. Then he opened his laptop and started looking. Finding her had not been his intention. He had started with the review itself, reading it again more slowly, parsing the way he parsed everything, not for what it said on the surface, but for what it revealed underneath. She hadn't been angry. Exactly. Anger would have been easier. Anger was personal and specific, and you could address it directly. This was something quieter and more devastating. This was disappointment from someone who hadn't expected much and still been let down. He looked at her profile. May W., San Francisco. 3 reviews total. A plumber. A taco truck. His hotel. The taco truck review was warm and funny and specific. She described the carne asada as the kind of thing that makes you believe people are fundamentally good. He'd read that one twice. He called his general manager. He asked about the reservation from 3 weeks ago, the table that had been flagged in Sanders' report. The GM pulled the records. A birthday party. Table of 6. Reservation under a Brenda Whitfield. He had the guest list from the coat check, because the hotel took names for a coat check as a courtesy. May was on the coat check list. Last name, Whitfield. He had a last name. He was not, he told himself, going to look further than that. He was going to read the review, take it seriously, use it to improve his operation, and respond to Sandra with something genuine instead of templated. That was the right thing to do. That was a professional thing. He Googled May Whitfield, San Francisco anyway. There was not much. A LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 4 years. A Facebook that was private. An old community newsletter from 2 years ago that mentioned a May Whitfield as having organized a food drive at an elementary school on Clement Street. Clement Street. He knew Clement Street. He knew every street in the city, the way you know a place you have chosen to love deliberately. Clement Street had a diner he'd been to once, years ago. Patty's something. Good eggs. Bottomless coffee. The kind of place that felt like it had been there forever and intended to stay. He sat with this information for another long moment. Then he did something that he would later describe to exactly no one, because there was no version of explaining it that didn't make him sound like a man who had lost his mind over a Yelp review. He put on his coat. He arrived at Patty's Corner Diner at 8:47 in the morning. He had not called ahead. He had not sent anyone. He had not, in any way that he could explain rationally, thought this through. The diner was busy. Morning rush. Counter stools all taken. Booths mostly full. The particular beautiful chaos of a short-order kitchen producing eggs and toast and coffee at a pace that looked like disorder from the outside and was actually a very specific kind of choreography. He stood at the door for a moment. There were 2 women working the floor. One was older, maybe 60, moving with the authority of someone who owned the place or had worked there long enough that the distinction no longer mattered. The other she was mopping, not because the floor needed mopping urgently, because one of the tables had spilled something, orange juice from the look of it, and she was handling it without being asked, which was a mark of someone who had long ago stopped waiting for instructions and just did what needed doing. She was wearing a blue apron over a white shirt. Her hair was pulled back. She was not wearing makeup, or it was the kind that asked nothing of the person looking at it. She was not remarkable in any way that the world usually decided to call remarkable, but she moved through that diner like it was hers. Like every table, every customer, every refilled coffee cup was a small responsibility she had accepted and intended to honor. There was a dignity in it that hit him somewhere he hadn't expected. He took a seat at the counter. She didn't look at him. She finished mopping. She returned the mop to wherever it lived. She checked on a table of 2 older men who were arguing about baseball with the easy comfort of people who have been arguing about baseball in this booth for 20 years. She refilled their coffee without being asked. She said something that made the one on the left laugh. A real laugh, Sudden and surprised. The best kind. Then she came to the counter. She pulled out her order pad. She looked up. Their eyes met. She had brown eyes, the kind that didn't announce themselves but held yours once they had them. She looked at him the way she probably looked at every customer. Not dismissive, not dazzled. Just present, ready to take the order, ready to do the job. "What can I get you?" she said. He had not planned what he was going to say. In his professional life, James Calloway was known for being prepared, for thinking 3 moves ahead, for walking into every room with a clear objective and a clean plan for achieving it. His director of operations called him the calmest person in any crisis. His lawyers said he was the only client they had who never panicked. He said, "I read your review." May's pen stopped moving. The diner did not stop. The kitchen kept cooking. The baseball men kept arguing. The bell above the door kept ringing as customers came and went. The world continued entirely normally. May was very still. "Which one?" she said. It wasn't really a question. "You called my hotel soulless," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, not afraid, not apologetic, just looking, reading him the way you read a room when you need to know if it's safe. "I called it a place where only rich people with no soul stay," she said. "That's different." "Is it?" "One's about the building. One's about the people in it." He thought about this. "And which did you mean?" "Both," she said. "You want coffee?" He said yes. She poured it without ceremony and set it in front of him and waited with her pen on her pad. "You own it," she said. Not a question either. She figured it out in the 30 seconds since he'd said, "I read your review." The suit, the hour. The fact that a hotel had a human being who read Yelp reviews seriously enough to come find the person who wrote them. "I do," he said. "And you came here?" "I did." "Why?" This was a question he hadn't answered for himself yet, and he was aware that whatever he said next was going to be either true or a reasonable facsimile of true, and that she would know the difference. "Because the review was right," he said, "and I wanted to know what happened." May looked at him. She put her pen down. She leaned on the counter. Not close, just the posture of a woman who was deciding something. "Your waiter looked through me like I was a ghost," she said, "for 2 hours. Refilled every glass at the table except mine. Brought me the wrong salad. When I told him, he looked at me like I had asked him to do something unreasonable." She paused. "I wasn't dressed like the other people at the table. I don't think he meant to be cruel. I think he just decided, somewhere in the first 30 seconds, that I wasn't the customer he needed to impress." James said nothing. "I've worked in service my whole life," May continued. "I know how it works. I know you look at the table, and you figure out who's paying, and you calibrate. I'm not naive. But I was there for my cousin's birthday, and I sat there for 2 hours feeling like I was taking up space that belonged to someone else. And then I went home and I stood in my kitchen eating rice out of a container. And I thought, somebody should know that this happened. Not for me, because it probably happens all the time to people who never say anything." She picked up her pen. "So I said something. You want eggs with that coffee?" He said yes. She wrote it down. She turned and called it back to the kitchen. And then she went to check on the baseball men, and 2 more tables came in, and the mornings kept going in places like this, relentlessly, lovingly, without pause. He sat at the counter and drank his coffee and watched her work. He came back the next morning. He didn't plan it. He was driving past Clement Street on the way to a meeting, and his hands made a decision his brain hadn't quite ratified yet, and he found himself parked in front of Patty's at 8:15 with no good reason to be there, except that he wanted more of the coffee, which was genuinely excellent. And he was honest with himself in the privacy of his own car. He wanted to see if she'd be different now that she knew who he was. She wasn't different. She said, "Back again," and poured his coffee before he sat down and had his eggs in front of him 8 minutes later, and didn't treat him like a problem or a curiosity or anything other than a regular, which was, he realized, the most disarming thing she could possibly have done. He came back the morning after that, and the one after that. By the end of the first week, he had a stool, not officially, but Patty, who May had quietly informed that the man in the suit was the owner of the Grand Calloway, because May was not a woman who kept secrets from her employer, had told 2 of the other regulars that the man in the corner stool was practically a regular now, And in Patty's taxonomy of human beings, practically a regular was close enough. He and May talked, not deeply at first. She was working. She had 12 tables in a kitchen that ran behind on the weekend, and a coffee situation that required her full attention, and she was not there to have conversations. She was there to do her job, but in the margins, when she refilled his cup, when the kitchen backed up and she had a moment to lean against the counter, when the late morning lull hit and the breakfast crowd had gone and the lunch crowd hadn't arrived yet, they talked. He learned things. He learned that she had grown up in this neighborhood, that her mother still lived 8 blocks away, that she had gone to city college for 2 years before Lily arrived and had told herself she would go back and had not gone back and had stopped telling herself she would because some truths required too much energy to keep carrying. He learned that she had been with Lily's father for 3 years and that he had left when Lily was 4 months old with the specific cowardice of a man who had decided that the life he'd agreed to was not the life he wanted and had prioritized his own clarity over everyone else's survival. He learned that May had never once publicly complained about this, not because she wasn't angry. She was somewhere deep and carefully banked. She absolutely was, but because the anger wasn't useful and Lily was watching, and May had decided a long time ago that what she modeled mattered more than what she felt. She learned things about him, too, not because he offered them easily. He didn't. He was a man who had spent 20 years being the most competent person in every room, and had confused competence with privacy, had learned to give people his attention without giving them access. But she asked questions the way she worked, directly, without performance, without agenda, and it was hard to be evasive with someone who wasn't trying to get anything from you. She learned that his father had died when he was 26 and left from the hotel the way you leave someone something you don't entirely trust them with, as a challenge disguised as a gift, that he had spent 2 years sleeping on a cot in the hotel's back office because he couldn't afford to live anywhere else and couldn't admit it, that he had fired his first restaurant manager not for incompetence, but for being cruel to the kitchen staff in small, invisible ways that nobody was supposed to notice, and he had noticed because he had worked every position in that hotel himself, including dishwasher, and he knew what invisible cruelty looked like from the inside. That's why the review bothered you, May said one morning. She said it without looking up from the coffee she was pouring. The particular delivery of someone who has figured something out and is being decent enough not to make a whole thing of it. What do you mean? He said. You built that place to be different from what it became. That one table, that one waiter. It's not the whole hotel, but it means something slipped. And you care about what slips. He looked at her. You're very observant, he said. I wait tables, she said. It's the same skill. 3 weeks in, something shifted. It was a Tuesday early. The diner not yet full. The lights of the front windows the particular gold of San Francisco morning that managed to be both warm and a little melancholy. And May came in from the back looking different, not visibly upset. May didn't do visibly upset in public. But there was something around her eyes, a tightness, the specific impression of a woman who has received news that she is processing alone because there is no other option. She poured his coffee. He said, What happened? She said, Nothing. He said, May. She was quiet for a moment. She refilled the sugar dispenser. That didn't need refilling. Then she said quietly, Lily's insurance claim got denied for the medication. They said it's not medically necessary. She paused. For asthma medication. They said it's not medically necessary. He said nothing. I'm going to appeal it, she said. The way she said everything. Matter of fact, forward-facing, already 3 steps into the solution. I've done it before. It takes about 6 weeks, and they usually overturn it. But in the meantime, I have to pay out of pocket, and that's $212, and I need to move some things around. She moved the sugar dispenser back where it had been. She's fine, May said. She's healthy right now. I'll figure it out. He believed her. She would figure it out. She figured everything out. That was both the thing he most admired about her and the thing that, sitting at that counter with his coffee going cold, made something ache in his chest in a way that was difficult to name and impossible to ignore. He said, I could. No, she said. I didn't finish. You were going to offer to pay for it, she said. And I'm telling you no before you finish, because if you finish, I'll have to refuse a completed sentence, and that's more awkward for both of us. It would take me 30 seconds. I know. It wouldn't be anything to me. I know that too, she said. That's the problem. He looked at her. Explain that. She leaned on the counter, not close, the same posture she always took when she was being honest. You're a good man, she said. I think. I'm still deciding. But you have to understand something about what it means to have someone offer to fix your problems in 30 seconds when you've been solving them alone for 8 years. It's not generosity, I feel. It's the size of the distance between us. He said, I didn't mean it to feel like distance. I know you didn't, she said. That's what makes it hard. She wanted to take an order. He sat with his cold coffee and thought about distance, the kind measured in dollars, in options, in the number of seconds it took to make a problem disappear. And for the first time in a long time, his money felt less like an asset and more like a language he spoke that she didn't or didn't want to, and he wasn't sure what that meant for any conversation they might be trying to have. He did not pay for the medication. He thought about it. He thought about it. He thought about it more than he would admit. He thought about calling Sandra and having her send an anonymous gift card to the diner. He thought about a dozen small architectures of generosity that would let him help without making her feel the distance she described. He didn't do any of them, because she had told him the truth about something, and the only adequate response to someone telling you the truth was to honor it. What he did instead was something that took him longer and cost him more in a different currency. He called the waiter, not to fire him, to talk to him, to sit down in a hotel restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon when it was quiet and look at a man who had been working for him for 4 years and say, tell me what you see when you look at a table. Walk me through it. What do you notice? What do you decide? The waiter, his name was Kevin. He was 28. He had been doing this since he was 19 and was genuinely good at it in most ways that mattered. Was uncomfortable. Then he was honest. He said, you calibrate. James said, tell me what that means. Kevin said, you look at the table and you figure out who's going to order the most, who's going to tip well, who's the decision maker, and you spend your energy there. He paused. It's not a rule anyone told me. It's just what you learn. You can't give everyone the same amount of attention all the time. There's not enough of you. James said, and if you're wrong about who matters? Kevin was quiet. There was a woman at a birthday dinner 3 weeks ago. James said, brown apron, quiet, didn't order the most, probably wasn't going to tip the highest. Kevin's face changed. Not guilt, exactly. Recognition. She noticed, James said, she wrote it down, and she was the most honest person who has reviewed this hotel in 4 years. He leaned forward. I want you to understand something. Every single person at every single table made a choice to be here. That choice cost them something, money, time, occasion. My job, your job, is to honor that choice. Every time. For every person. Not the person who looks like they belong here. Every person. Kevin said, yes, sir. James said, I mean it. Kevin said, I know you do. He restructured the service training. Not because of Kevin specifically. Because if Kevin was doing it, others were doing it, and he hadn't seen it because he hadn't looked closely enough. And the fact that he hadn't looked closely enough was its own kind of failure. The failure of a man who had let his success convince him that his instincts were enough when what was actually required was sustained, careful attention. He didn't tell May any of this. He came to the diner. He drank his coffee. He listened to her talk about Lily, who had lost her first molar and put it under a pillow, and then stayed awake until 2 a.m. to catch the tooth fairy in the act, and May had been the tooth fairy, and Lily had not caught her, but had come extremely close, and May had spent 5 minutes crouched behind the laundry basket in the dark in her own apartment, thinking she was going to have to explain herself to an 8-year-old. He laughed. He hadn't laughed like that, surprised and entirely unguarded, in longer than he could account for. She smiled at him, not the professional smile she gave the tables. A real one, small and quick, and gone almost before it was there. He thought about it for the rest of the day. The insurance appeal came through. 6 weeks later, exactly as she predicted, overturned, medication covered retroactively. May had managed the out-of-pocket month with the precise budget management of someone who had been doing financial tria so long it had become second nature, moving money from the grocery column to the medication column, and eating more rice than she preferred, and not mention it to anyone. She told him matter-of-factly, the way she told him everything, while refilling his coffee. "That's good news," he said. "Yeah," she said. "You don't seem relieved." "I am," she said. Relief and me have a complicated relationship. Every time something gets better, I'm mostly just waiting to see what's going to need fixing next." She paused. "That's probably a depressing thing to say at 8 in the morning." "It's honest," he said. "Same thing, some mornings." He said, "When's the last time something happened that you didn't have to fix? That just happened and it was good, and there was nothing to manage?" She thought about it. She thought about it for long enough that it was its own answer. "Lily laughed so hard last week she fell off her chair," she said finally. "She was fine. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. I didn't have to do anything. I just got to watch it happen." She smiled. "The real one, the quick one." "So, 6 days ago." He said, "Good." She said, "You're easier to talk to than I expected." He said, "What did you expect?" "Someone who wanted something." She said, "Rich men who show up somewhere usually want something." "I wanted to know what happened," he said. "Like I said, and now you know." "Now I know a lot more than that," he said. She looked at him. The morning continued around them. The kitchen, the tables, the bell above the door, all the ordinary machinery of a place that fed people and asked nothing of them except that they sit down and let it. "James," she said. It was the first time she'd used his name. He noticed it. She noticed him notice. "Don't," she said, but not unkindly. "Just clear." "I'm not doing anything," he said. "You're thinking about doing something. That's not illegal." "In this diner it is," she said. "I made a rule when... just now." He almost smiled. "What's the rule?" "No complications before 10 a.m., she said. "It's a diner. People come here to start their day right." She picked up his empty cup. "You want more coffee?" "Yes," he said. She poured it. The rule, he noted, said nothing about after 10 a.m. He noted this carefully. He said nothing about it, but he noted it. The thing about slow burns is that they don't feel slow from the inside. From the inside, they feel like nothing happening, and then nothing happening, and then nothing happening, and then all at once something has happened. And you're trying to figure out when exactly it began because it doesn't feel like it began anywhere. It feels like it was always there, and you just weren't paying attention. James paid attention to everything. This was his great professional strength and his significant personal liability. He noticed when the linen supplier had changed their thread count before anyone told him. He noticed when his director of operations was overwhelmed 2 weeks before she admitted it. He noticed, in restaurants he visited as a guest, the exact moment a kitchen fell behind. He noticed May. He noticed that she always checked on the tables with children first. That she remembered how every regular took their coffee, without writing it down. That when someone came in alone and looked like they'd had a hard morning, she gave them a corner booth and let them sit without pushing for an order, just coffee and space, and a quiet understanding that sometimes that was what a person needed. He noticed that she was funny in a way that snuck up on you. Not performing funny. Just genuinely, quietly funny. The kind of person who said one unexpected thing in a matter-of-fact voice and left you smiling for an hour trying to figure out exactly why. He noticed that she never asked him anything about money or the hotel, or any of the things that people usually asked him about. She asked him what he'd eaten for dinner, whether he'd slept, whether he'd talked to anyone other than employees this week, which was a question that landed with more precision than she probably intended. She noticed him too. She noticed when he was carrying something. Not stress exactly, more like the particular way of a person who makes large decisions alone and has done so for so long that the aloneness has become part of the structure, load-bearing. Not something to be removed without consequence. She didn't comment on it. She just adjusted, talked less, let the silence be comfortable, refilled his coffee without being asked. She noticed that he tipped extravagantly and then looked slightly embarrassed about it, which she found disproportionately endearing. She noticed that he never talked about his personal life, not about relationships, not about family beyond the father who had died, not about anything that happened outside of the hotel and this diner, as though the rest of his life existed in a compartment he decided she didn't need access to. She noticed this, and she didn't push. She had her own compartments. Lily met him by accident. It was a Saturday, which was unusual, May didn't typically work Saturday mornings because her mother had Lily, and May tried to use Saturday mornings for laundry and grocery shopping and the administrative overhead of being alive. But Patty had called at 7 with a plea because 2 people had called in sick, and May was the only one she trusted with the Saturday breakfast crowd, which was the hardest crowd. Families and tourists and people who had expectations and time and the willingness to complain. May had brought Lily. This was not ideal, but it was the only option because her mother had a doctor's appointment and Miss Dorothea was visiting her sister in Oakland, and May's options were bring Lily or tell Patty. She couldn't come, and Patty sounded like she was going to cry on the phone, and May was not able to be the thing that made Patty cry. Lily sat in the corner booth with her iPad and her headphones and a plate of pancakes and strict instructions to stay exactly there, which Lily agreed to with a confident nod of a child who fully intended to honor this agreement for approximately 15 minutes. James arrived at 8:30. His stool was occupied. He took a booth instead, which he never did, and May brought his coffee to the booth and said, "I'm sorry, it's a situation today," with concise apology of a woman juggling 5 things. He said, "Can I help?" She said, "Do you know how to wait tables?" He said, "I've done it before." She looked at him. He said, "I told you, I worked every position." She handed him a coffee pot. What happened next was improbable and then somehow natural. He refilled cups. She took orders. The kitchen was behind, and she ran food, and he cleared plates, and Patty, who had come in despite her own plans, stood behind the counter watching the billionaire with the good suit clearing booth 4's breakfast plates with the focused competence of a man doing the job, not performing it. Patty said nothing. She poured coffee and said nothing and smiled into her cup. At 9:45, Lily materialized. She had honored the 15-minute intention for closer to an hour and a half, which was genuinely impressive, but the pancakes were gone, and the iPad had died, and the corner booth had lost its appeal, and Lily was 8 and constitutionally incapable of staying in one place when something interesting was happening elsewhere. She appeared at May's elbow while May was taking an order. May looked down. Lily looked up at her with the expression of a child who knows she is technically in trouble, but is choosing to present herself as an asset rather than a liability. "I can help," Lily said. "You can go back to the booth," May said. "I know how to carry things," Lily said. "Lily!" "Mom." James arrived with an empty bus tray and stopped when he saw them, this particular portrait. May with her order pad, Lily with her negotiating expression, the entire shape of their relationship visible in about 5 seconds of observation. Lily looked at him. "Who are you?" she said, with the direct suspicion of a child who had learned that new adults in her mother's life required investigation. "James," he said. "Why are you working here?" she said. "You don't work here." "I'm helping out," he said. "Do you know how?" "I think so," he said. "You're Lily." Lily's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that?" "Your mom talks about you," he said. Lily processed this. Then she said, with the air of a judge delivering a measured verdict, "She didn't tell me about you." "Lily," May said. "That's interesting," Lily said to James, ignoring her mother with the practiced ease of a child who had identified an ally. "What did she say?" "That you're funny," he said, "and that you fell off your chair laughing last week." Lily broke into a grin so wide it consumed her whole face. "I did," she said. "It was a really good joke." She looked at her mother. "Can I help?" May looked at her daughter. She looked at James. She handed Lily a stack of paper napkins. "Roll those," she said. "Silverware's behind the counter. Don't drop anything." Lily took the napkins with the gravity of someone given an important assignment and marched to counter. James said quietly, "She's exactly like you." May said, "She's louder." "She's funnier," he said. May looked at him. "Don't tell her that. She doesn't need the encouragement." He smiled. She turned away before she could respond to it. After the breakfast rush, Patty fed them all, May and James and Lily, at the counter, which was Patty's form of payment and gratitude, and also her way of keeping people in the building she liked for a little while longer. Lily ate a grilled cheese with a seriousness that suggested it was the most important meal of her young life. James drank a 3rd cup of coffee. May ate a bowl of soup and looked at her daughter, and then at the man sitting next to her daughter, and then at her soup. Lily said, "Do you have kids?" James said, "No." Lily said, "Do you want them?" May said, Lily. Lily said, "It's a normal question." James said, "I haven't thought about it much." Lily said, "You should. Kids are pretty good." James said, "I'm getting that impression." Lily said, "Do you like my mom?" May put her spoon down. James looked at Lily with the expression of a man who had negotiated complex business deals and adversarial board meetings and genuinely difficult conversations, and had just met his match in an 8-year-old with a grilled cheese. He said, "Your mom is one of the most interesting people I've ever met." Lily considered this. "That's not what I asked," she said. "Lily," May said, "that's enough." "I'm just asking," Lily said, unbothered, finishing her grilled cheese. James looked at May. May looked at her soup. Patty, behind the counter, was profoundly busy with something that required her to face away from all of them. October arrived the way October arrived in San Francisco, without drama, just a slight cooling of the air and a shift in the light that made everything look slightly more significant than it actually was. May noticed this every year, and every year it affected her in the same way, a kind of seasonal wistfulness she couldn't name and didn't try to. She and James had established a rhythm. He came to the diner on weekday mornings. Sometimes they'd talk a lot, sometimes very little. He had started staying until 10 or 10:30, which was past the no complications rule, but neither of them had acknowledged this directly. He had taken to leaving a book on the counter when he left, not with any ceremony, just setting it there, something he'd read that he thought she might like. She read them. She didn't always agree with his taste. She told him so, which he seemed to find more satisfying than agreement. She had been to the hotel twice. The first time was an accident. She'd been nearby running an errand, and it had started to do what San Francisco weather does without warning, a sudden committed fog, and she ducked into the lobby to wait out, and had stood there looking at the place with different eyes than she'd had at Brenda's birthday dinner. It was beautiful, she would admit that. High ceilings, good light. The lobby had a sense of proportion that she recognized now as intentional, designed to make you feel not small, but situated, placed somewhere with care. Kevin, the waiter, was working the lobby bar. He recognized her. She recognized him. There was a moment of pure awkwardness that they both survived by deciding, simultaneously, to be adults about it. He brought her coffee. He brought it to her table instead of the bar. He refilled it without being asked. He did not look through her. She left him a good tip and a 2-sentence note on a napkin that said, "I updated the review. You did good today." She did not tell James about this visit. The second time she went to the hotel was intentional. James had asked her. He'd said it simply in the diner one morning without preamble. "Would you come to the hotel?" Not the restaurant. The rooftop. "There's something I want you to see." She'd said, "When?" He'd said, "Sunday morning. Early." She'd said, "I have Lily." He'd said, "Bring her." She'd looked at him for a long moment. Then she'd said, "Okay." Sunday was cold and clear. The specific San Francisco clear that required a coat, but rewarded you with visibility. The bay, the bridge, the hills in the distance, all of it laid out like the city was making an argument for itself. The rooftop of the Grand Callaway was... She didn't have the word for it immediately. It was a garden of a kind, not decorative. Actually a garden, raised beds with herbs and vegetables, some are going dormant for fall, but some still green, and the smell that was real, not manufactured, the actual smell of growing things in city air. Lily made a noise like a small explosion of joy. She ran to the nearest raised bed and pressed her hands into soil and looked up at James with something approaching reverence. "You grew these," she said. "The hotel did," he said. "The restaurant uses them." "That's amazing," Lily said with complete sincerity. May stood at the edge of the rooftop and looked at the city. James came and stood beside her. The distance between them was the width of maybe one person. The specific distance, that means something without saying it. "Why did you want to see this?" she said. "Because I thought you'd understand it," he said. "Why it matters." She looked at the garden. A hotel rooftop with vegetables, rosemary, tomatoes spent for the season, something green she couldn't identify, the domesticity of it, the insistence on something real in the middle of all this deliberate luxury. "You put this here so the kitchen could use ingredients that grew somewhere," she said, "not to show people." just to make the food more honest. Yes, he said. Nobody sees this, she said. Your guests don't come up here. No. So who's it for? The people who make the food, he said. The kitchen staff. They know it's here. They know where it comes from. He paused. I wanted them to know that I thought about where things come from. May looked at him. The city stretched out below them, indifferent and beautiful. The review really got to you, she said. You got to me, he said. She turned away from the view. Lily was somewhere in the garden, narrating to herself, a running commentary on what she was touching, the way children do when they're so interested in something that they have to put it into words or explode. James, May said. I know, he said. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to say something careful, he said. Something about distance, or about how this is complicated, or about how you don't have room for complicated. She was quiet. Were you wrong? He said. She thought about it. She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things. No, she said, but I wasn't going to say it right now. When were you going to say it? When it was more necessary, she said. And right now it's not. She looked at him. Right now I'm standing on a rooftop looking at my city with a man who came to my diner because he cared about a Yelp review. The situation is strange enough without me explaining all the reasons it can't go anywhere. It could go somewhere, he said. James, I know the distance, he said. I know it's real. I'm not pretending it isn't. I'm saying I've spent 41 years being very clear about what's practical and what's possible and what makes sense from a structural standpoint. And it's made me extremely good at my job. He paused. And it's made everything else in my life very quiet. She looked at him. He looked at her. Lily's voice drifted over from somewhere in the tomato beds, counting something very seriously. May said, I have a complicated life. I know. I have a daughter who asks invasive questions, and an apartment with a broken elevator, and a budget spreadsheet on my phone that I check every morning. I know. None of that is going to be different because you want it to be. I'm not asking you to be different, he said. I'm asking if I can be part of it. She looked away, over the city, over the bridge in the distance, over all of it, the whole beautiful, complicated, fog-prone city she had lived in her whole life, and understood and loved even when it was unkind. She said, You should know I'm a very slow decision-maker. He said, I come to the diner every day. I have time. She almost smiled. He didn't push it. Lily appeared from the garden with a sprig of rosemary clutched in her fist and an expression of absolute triumph. Can I keep this? She said. James looked at May. May looked at her daughter. Ask nicely, May said. Lily looked at James with large, expectant eyes. It smells really good, she said, which was not exactly asking nicely, but contained enough information and enough hope that it amounted to approximately the same thing. It's yours, he said. Lily clutched it to her chest and went back to the garden. May watched her go. She said, She likes you. He said, She's conducting a very thorough evaluation. She likes you anyway. May said. He didn't say anything, but something in him, something quiet and careful and long in use, shifted, opened very slightly, the way a room opens when someone turns on a light in it. Not dramatic, just lighter than it had been. Here's the thing about James Calloway that May did not yet know. He had been engaged once. Her name had been Caroline. She was from a family whose name was also on buildings, the particular tier of San Francisco wealth that had been here long enough to become architecture. They had dated for 4 years and gotten engaged at 34 and spent 18 months planning a wedding that cost more than May's apartment building. And then, 7 months before the wedding, Caroline had sat down across from him at the kitchen table in his apartment and said, very calmly, I think we're very good at being a certain kind of couple, and I don't think either of us knows what it would mean to actually need each other, and I think we should stop before we find out the hard way. He had agreed. This was the thing that troubled him most in retrospect. How quickly he had agreed, how clearly he had recognized, in the moment she said it, that she was right, how little he had grieved it, not because he hadn't cared about her, but because the caring had existed at a specific altitude, the temperature-controlled altitude of two people who had chosen each other thoughtfully and rationally, and with full information, and without the dangerous irrationality of needing. He had not let himself need anyone since he was 26, and his father died and left him something he didn't know how to carry. Need felt like vulnerability, and vulnerability felt like a structural weakness, and he had built his hotel, and his life, and his professional identity on the premise that a thing only stands if you examined every weakness and reinforced it. May needed things, not from him. She was very clear about that, exquisitely self-contained, the most structurally sound person he had ever met. But she needed life. She needed it to work, to hold together, to provide for her daughter, to be survivable. She moved through her days with the full knowledge that she was the only load-bearing wall, and she bore it without complaint and with a kind of grace that was not the pretty, decorative kind, but the functional kind, the kind that actually held things up. Watching her need things and meet those needs herself completely every single day, it was the most honest thing he had ever seen. It had cracked something open in him that he was not sure he had the engineering to address. He told her about Caroline in November, not because she asked, she wouldn't have asked, but because they'd been talking in the diner about his apartment, which had come up tangentially because she'd asked him once if he ever cooked for himself, and he'd said not really, not for one person. And she'd said that was sad in the way she said things, matter of fact, no softening, and he'd said maybe. And then somehow from there they arrived at the conversation, and he told her. She listened the way she did everything, fully, without interrupting, with the attention of someone for whom listening was an active practice. When he finished, she said, "Do you miss her?" "No," he said. "I think I missed a version of myself. I thought I was being when I was with her. We made sense on paper." "Things that make sense on paper," May said. "Yeah," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Lily's father made sense on paper," she said. "Same neighborhood, same friends, like the same things. Very logical choice." She refilled his coffee without looking at it. The automatic grace of someone who had done the motion 10,000 times. He was a good person. He just didn't have I don't know what to call it, the substance. When things got hard, there wasn't enough of him to hold on to. How hard did things get? James said. Lily was 3 months old, May said. She had an asthma episode in the middle of the night. I was up. I had her. I was handling it. I knew what to do. But I turned around to say something to him, and he wasn't there. He'd gone back to sleep. She paused. Not because he didn't care. Because he could. Because somewhere in him, the decision had already been made that this was my thing to carry, and he had elected himself to the advisory board. She said it without heat, just the clear-eyed accounting of a woman who had been doing the math for 8 years. He left 4 months later, she said. We were both relieved, which is its own kind of sad. She looked at her hands. I don't regret him. I have Lily, but I decided something when he left, that if I was going to do this alone, I was going to do it actually alone. Not half alone, which is the worst kind. Not pretending to share something with someone who'd already made up their mind about how much they were willing to carry. James looked at her. That's why it matters, he said. The distance. You're not afraid of me. You're afraid of half. She looked at him. Yes, she said. He nodded. He didn't say I wouldn't be half, because that was the kind of thing you could say, and it cost nothing, and she would know it cost nothing, and it would be worse than saying nothing. What he said was, I understand. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, You're the first person I've told that story to in 3 years. Why? Because I didn't think anyone would understand the part about the advisory board, she said. Most people think I'm too hard on him. You're not, James said. No, she said. I'm not. December came, and with it the particular pressure of the holidays, which meant different things to them. For May it meant more shifts because the diner was busier, which meant more money, which meant she could buy Lily a real Christmas, which she was already planning with the spreadsheet precision she applied to everything. She knew what Lily wanted. A specific brand of art supplies, a book she'd been asking about for 2 months, new sneakers, and she was budgeting backwards from December 25th with the quiet determination of a woman who knew that she couldn't give her daughter everything, but she could give her this. For James, it meant the hotel's busiest season, which meant he was in the building more, and at the diner less. And the mornings he did make it, he was carrying more, the subtle accumulation of a man managing a large operation at its most demanding. On a Thursday in early December, he arrived at 8 and didn't take off his coat. She noticed. She brought his coffee and said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Nothing. Busy." She said, "James." He said, "We might be losing the restaurant chef. He's been offered something in New York. If he goes, I lose the person who trained the whole kitchen. And we have Valentine's Day bookings already in. And finding someone at this level in this timeline is..." He stopped. "I'm complaining." "I'm sorry." "You're allowed," she said. "You don't complain." "I complain internally," she said. "Very loudly. It's a whole production. You just can't hear it." He almost smiled. "Do you know what you want to do?" she said. "I want to keep him," he said. "But not at the cost of him resenting staying. That doesn't help anyone. So let him go," she said, "and find someone. It's not that simple." "No," she said, "but you built the place once. You can rebuild the kitchen." She paused. "You're not afraid of starting over. You've done it before." He looked at her. "You told me," she said, "sleeping on the cot. 2 years. Starting from nothing." "I was 26, he said. "And now you know more," she said, "so it'll take less time." She refilled his cup. "Let him go. Be glad he got the offer. Then go find the next one." He sat with this. "You'd make a very good director of operations," he said. "I know," she said, "but I'd have to wear different shoes." The chef left. James found a replacement in 6 weeks, a woman named Grace who had been running a smaller restaurant in the East Bay with the frustrated energy of someone who had outgrown her space and knew it. She was in the Grand Callaway kitchen by mid-January. By February, the food had changed, not worse, different, more itself, something that felt like it had decided what was instead of what it was supposed to be. He told May. She said, "Can I try it?" He said, "Come to dinner." She said, "Not the restaurant." He said, "Not the restaurant." They ate in the hotel's private dining room, which was technically for corporate events, but which James had used exactly twice for personal dinners, and which felt, on a Thursday evening in January with the table set for 2 and Grace's food arriving in quiet sequence, like the kind of room that had been waiting for a reason. Lily was with May's mother. May had worn a blue dress. Not new. She couldn't afford new, but the kind of dress that didn't announce its age, clean and simple and doing what it needed to do. She'd looked at herself in the mirror before leaving and thought, not bad, and meant it without irony, which for her was its own kind of victory. James had been there when she arrived. He looked at her the way he'd learned not to look at her in the diner, because the diner was public and there was work to do, and she'd made a rule about complications before 10 a.m. Here there was no rule. He looked at her directly, without apology, with the full attention of a man who had spent 41 years noticing everything, and had finally found something he couldn't stop noticing. She said, "Don't look at me like that." He said, "Like what?" She said, "Like you decided something." He said, "I decided something 2 months ago." She said, "When?" He said, "The morning I found out you'd stayed up all night doing an insurance appeal instead of sleeping, and you came in for your shift anyway, and you made the baseball men laugh, and you ran food for a table of tourists who left you 9%. She looked at him. "You kept moving," he said. "No one who didn't know you would have known anything was wrong. I only knew because I was paying attention." He paused. "I want to keep paying attention, for as long as you'll let me." She sat down. She looked at the table for a moment, at the careful setting, at the glass of water that had been placed with precision, at the small centerpiece that was. She looked more closely. Rosemary. Sprigs of rosemary in a simple glass. The same smell as the rooftop garden. She looked up at him. "That's a lot," she said. "I know," he said. "I told you I'm a slow decision maker. I remember," he said. "I haven't decided anything." "I know." She picked up her fork. Grace's food arrived. Something simple first. A broth that tasted like it had been made with patience. Soup that asked you to slow down, and May slowed down. And for 2 hours they ate and talked, and she told him something she'd never told anyone, which was that she'd always wanted to write, had kept a journal for 12 years, had written 3 short stories she'd never shown anyone, and he listened with the same quality of attention. He gave everything important, the kind that made you feel, not observed but seen. She told him this and did not feel foolish. This was new. She told him this, and he said, "Will you let me read them someday?" And she said maybe, which was as close to yes as she got on the first ask. He drove her home. He parked in front of her building. She looked up at the dark third-floor windows. She said, "The elevator's still broken." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm not inviting you up." He said, "I know that too." She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "This is terrifying." He said, "Yes." She said, "Good. I needed to know you knew that." She got out of the car. She walked to the door. She turned around once, just once, and he was still there watching, making sure she was inside, the automatic decency of it. And she thought, he would have done that for anyone, but he's only here for me. She went inside. She stood in the hallway for a moment, at the bottom of the stairs, with the broken elevator sign, and the smell of someone else's cooking and particular texture of her actual life surrounding her completely. She felt something, not resolved, not certain, not any of the things that a decision would feel like, just the terrifying, inconvenient, unmistakable feeling of wanting something. She climbed the 3 flights. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. January turned into February. They were not together. Technically, there had been no declaration, no conversation that arrived at a clean conclusion. But there had been the dinner, and there had been 3 more dinners after that, at different places, good restaurants, and one very excellent taco truck that May had insisted on, because she wanted him to understand that the best food she'd ever had did not require marble floors. He'd agreed, eating a carne asada taco on a paper plate, that this was the best thing he'd put in his mouth in recent memory, and she looked at it with open satisfaction and said, "I know." He had met her mother. This had not been planned. May's mother, Dolores, had come to the diner on a Friday to drop off Lily after school, which she did sometimes when May was working the afternoon shift, and James had been there, which he was sometimes on Fridays now, and the introduction had been unavoidable. Dolores had looked at him. She had looked at May. She had sat down at the counter and ordered a piece of pie and said, "So you're the hotel man," with the tone of a woman who had done this assessment before and intended to be thorough. He had said, "Yes, ma'am." Dolores had said, "My daughter doesn't bring people into her life." He had said, "I know." Dolores had said, "She has Lily to think about." He had said, "I know that too." Dolores had looked at him for a long moment with the comprehensive gaze of a woman who had raised a daughter alone, who knew exactly what it took and exactly what it cost, and was not willing to see it disrupted for something casual. Then she'd said, "This pie is very good," and turned to May and talked about Lily's school project. And James had understood that he had passed some initial evaluation by the narrowest of margins, and that the real exam was ongoing and indefinite. He was fine with this. He respected it. Lily, meanwhile, had progressed in her own evaluation. She had decided that James was, in her words, not annoying, which May had privately informed him was very high praise. She had also decided that she could ask him about hotels because she was doing a school project about different kinds of buildings, and hotels were a building and therefore relevant. He had spent 45 minutes on a Saturday afternoon explaining the architecture of the Grand Callaway to an 8-year-old who asked excellent questions and wrote some of the answers in a notebook with a unicorn on the cover. May had watched this in the kitchen doorway, making tea she didn't particularly want, staying in the kitchen far longer than necessary. She had stood there watching a man she was terrified to trust sit on her living room floor, explaining load-bearing walls to her daughter, and she had thought very clearly, almost against her will, this is the one. She had returned to the kitchen. She had held on to the counter for a moment. Then she had made the tea she didn't want and gone back to the living room, and sat down and listened to the rest of the explanation. February 14th, Valentine's Day. James was at the hotel all day. The restaurant was full, every table twice over, and Grace's kitchen was run like it had always run this way, with the confidence of a kitchen that had figured out what it was. He checked in at 7, 8, 9, the natural orb of a man who cared about every detail and would not go home until the last table had been cleared and the kitchen had been thanked. May worked a double. The diner did not do Valentine's specials. Patty had a philosophical objection to the holiday that she expressed by working as normal and donating 20% of the day's profits to a domestic violence shelter, which she had done quietly every year for 11 years, and which May have found out about in year 3, and which had made her love Patty in a way that didn't require any further explanation. May got home at 11:30. Lily was asleep. The apartment was quiet in the way apartments get quiet after a long day, with a particular weight of accumulated hours. She sat on the couch. Her phone showed a text from James, sent at 10:45. It said, "Last table just left. I thought about you today. That's all." She held her phone. She thought about the stories she'd written that she'd never shown anyone. She thought about the 3 flights of stairs every day and the broken elevator. She thought about Lily's gap-toothed smile and the rosemary sprig she'd taken from the rooftop garden, which was sitting in a small glass on the kitchen windowsill, and had somehow survived November and December and was still alive, still fragrant, improbable. She typed, "I thought about you too. Get some sleep?" She put her phone down. She sat in the quiet. She thought, slow decision maker. She thought, "But you've already decided, May." She thought, "I know." She called him. This was unusual. They texted. They talked in person. She had never called him before, and she was aware that calling, in the middle of a regular week in late February, was its own kind of statement. He answered on the second ring. She said, "I want to show you the stories." He said, "Okay." She said, "I'm not ready." He said, "Okay." She said, "But I wanted you to know that I'm moving in the direction of ready." He said, "I'll be here." She said, "I know. That's why I called." Silence. Not empty silence. The kind full of things that were true. He said, "May." She said, "Don't say anything meaningful. I'm not ready for that either." He said, "Good night." She said, "Good night." She hung up. She went to her room. She opened her laptop. She opened the folder with the stories. She read one of them herself, for the first time in 2 years, and it was better than she remembered. Rougher, but better. Real, in the way real things were hard to explain. She thought, "I'm going to show him this. Not tonight, but soon." She closed the laptop. She thought about a 1-star review she'd left on a Tuesday night, standing in her kitchen eating cold rice. She thought, that one small true thing. It had not been nothing. Here is what nobody saw coming. In March, a journalist wrote a piece. Not about James and May. They had been careful. They were not yet official in any public sense. They had not posted anything, announced anything, been photographed anywhere that mattered. The few people who knew Patty, Dolores, Lily, who could not be told not to know things, were not the kind of people who talked. The journalist wrote a piece about hotel reputation management. It was a trend piece, the kind that gets assigned in slow news weeks, about the way hotels and restaurants responded to negative online reviews. It cited several examples. A famous chef who had publicly attacked a food blogger, a hotel chain that had offered gift cards to unhappy reviewers, a well-regarded property in San Francisco that had shown up at a reviewer's workplace the morning after a 1-star review. This last example had come from Kevin, not maliciously. Kevin had mentioned it to a friend. The friend had mentioned it to someone else. The journalist had a source who had heard it and had found it. As these things went, charming and unusual, and exactly the kind of detail that made a story feel human. The piece ran on a Wednesday. By Thursday, it had been picked up by 3 other outlets. By Friday, the headline was, "Billionaire hotel owner personally tracks down 1-star reviewer. What happened next is not what you'd expect." By Saturday, it was everywhere. May found out from Brenda. Brenda texted her at 7 in the morning on a Friday with a link and the message, "May, is this you?" May was in the middle of her shift. She stepped into the back. She opened the link. She read the piece. It was accurate, not fully accurate. It had the emotional tone of a feel-good story rather than the truth, which was more complicated and less resolved. But the facts were correct. 1-star review. Hotel owner. Her workplace. The morning after. Her name was not in it. The diner was not named. She was referred to only as a San Francisco resident who worked in the service industry. But the comments were people trying to find her, not viciously. The piece had framed the story as sweet, which meant the audience responding to it wanted more sweetness, wanted the full story, wanted to know if the hotel owner and the reviewer had ended up together, because the story had that shape, even in the incomplete version, and people recognized the shape and wanted to see it completed. She put her phone in her pocket. She went back to work. She served the breakfast crowd. She refilled coffee. She made the baseball men laugh. She did not look at her phone again until 11. At 11, she had 14 texts from people she hadn't heard from in years. 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. A voicemail from a podcast that was apparently interested in her story. She called James. He answered immediately. He said, "I know. I'm sorry. I'm handling it." She said, "How did they get the story?" He said, "Kevin mentioned it to someone. I don't think he understood what he was setting in motion. I'm not going to hold it against him." She said, "How much worse is it going to get?" "I don't know," he said. "Probably not much worse. The story they told is incomplete, and the way they told it is the version people want to believe. If we say nothing, it fades." She said, "And if someone finds out it's me?" He was quiet for a moment. She said, "The part they want, the ending. They're going to want to know if we're together." He said, "Are we?" She said, "James." He said, "I'm asking because I want to know, not because the internet wants to know." She was quiet. She stood in the back of the diner, by the supply shelves, with the smell of coffee and grease and the sounds of the kitchen around her. She said, "I need some time to think." He said, "Okay." She said, "I mean I need actual time, not diner counter time." He said, "Take what you need." She hung up. She took a week. She did not go to the diner that week. Patty arranged the schedule, understanding without being asked that May needed the covers. James did not come to the diner. He had understood. She spent the week in her actual life. She took Lily to school. She did laundry. She called her mother and did not tell her about the article because her mother would find out and would want to talk about it, and May wasn't ready to talk about it yet. She went to the grocery store. She checked her spreadsheet. She did the small, irreducible work of her actual days. She read the article again on Tuesday and again on Thursday. She read the comments, which she had been trying not to do. Most of them were kind. People who had felt invisible in restaurants. People who had worked service jobs. People who recognized something in the incomplete story. One person wrote, "Whoever she is, I hope she knows she's not invisible to them." Another wrote, "This is the most romantic thing I've read in years, and it might not even be a romance." She read that one several times. On Friday, she walked to the park near her apartment and sat on a bench and let herself think about what she actually wanted, not what was practical, not what made sense, not what fit the spreadsheet. She wanted to show him the stories. She wanted to have dinner again, in a room with real food and no performance. She wanted Lily to keep having someone who sat on the floor explaining buildings to her with genuine interest. She wanted more mornings, more of the specific quality of his attention, more the way he made her feel seen, without making her feel examined. She wanted to not be afraid of wanting this. This, she thought, was a decision, not the grand romantic decision, not the one that resolved everything. Just, I'm going to stop being afraid of wanting this and see what happens next. She got up from the bench. She went home. She called him. He answered on the first ring. She said, "I'm going to show you the stories." He said, "When?" She said, "Sunday, you can come here. Lily will be at my mom's." He said, "Okay." She said, "And James?" He said, "Yeah." It was, in fact, one of her greatest skills. It always had been. It had just taken a 1-star review for anyone else to notice. 6 months later, the article about the hotel review was still circulating occasionally, still getting shared, still generating the same comments from people who recognized its shape. The journalist had written a follow-up piece, a short one, noting only that the hotel had significantly improved its service reviews across all platforms, and that the reviewer, whoever she was, had apparently made a difference. May read the follow-up piece at the counter of the diner during the late morning lull. She set her phone down. She looked around at the room she knew better than almost any other room. The counter, the booze, the baseball men, the kitchen she could navigate with her eyes closed, the bell above the door that rang every time someone came in with a specific kind of need that a place like this was built to meet. She thought about the night she'd written the review. She thought about cold rice on a Tuesday and the specific dignity of putting a true thing somewhere. She thought about what it had set in motion. She had sent one of the stories to a literary magazine 2 weeks ago. She had not heard back and might not hear back, and if she didn't hear back, she would send it somewhere else. And then somewhere else after that. With the same patient persistence, she applied to insurance appeals and broken elevators, and every other thing that required sustained, organized effort in the direction of something true. James texted at 9:43. Good morning. Also, I found your second story on your laptop last night, by accident while looking for a charger. I read the whole thing. I'm sorry. I'm also not sorry. It's incredible. She texted back. You're in so much trouble. He texted. I know. Coffee? She texted. Counter's yours. She put her phone in her apron pocket. She picked up a coffee pot. She went to check on the baseball man. He arrived at 10:15. He took his stool. She poured his coffee without being asked. The way she'd been doing for 7 months now. The automatic grace of practice made permanent. He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, the story. He said, I know. She said, you went through my laptop. He said, I was looking for a charger. She said, and you read the whole thing. He said, I tried to stop. She said, and? He said, I couldn't stop. She poured her own coffee and stood across from him at the counter. She said, what did you think? He said, I think you should send it today. She looked at her coffee. She said, I already sent it. He went still. This morning, she said, before my shift. He looked at her. She said, you're in my stories, you know. Not by name, but you're in them. He said, which part? She thought about it. She said, the part where someone pays attention and it changes things. He said, nothing. She said, it always changes things. When someone actually pays attention. He said, I know. She said, I know you know. The diner moved around them, unchanged and continuous. The kitchen and the tables and the bell above the door and the baseball men and all the ordinary, irreducible work of a place that fed people and asked nothing of them except that they sit down and let it. May looked at the man across her counter. She thought, a 1-star review. She thought, one small, true thing. She thought, look where it goes. She picked up her coffee pot. She went to work. She gave his hotel 1 star. He showed up at her job the next morning. Neither of them knew it was the beginning of something they'd both spend the rest of their lives being grateful for. But that's how it usually is. The things that matter most start small. They start true, and then they go.